We're talking about Doodle when he's born, and why he gets named Doodle. He's named this, really strong name, which is of course a joke because there's no way that name works for him, right? William Armstrong. And so instead, what we've got here now is a renaming. And why is he renamed? Well, because he's kind of like a doodle bug. I began to call him Doodle. And in time, even Mama and Daddy thought it was a better name than William Armstrong. I'm on page 386, right in the middle of the page. Renaming my brother was perhaps the kindest thing, right? Oh, by the way, Aunt Nicey disagrees. She says, call babies should be treated with special respect since they might turn out to be saints. Think about how this story is a story about saints, about crucifixion, about resurrection. All those terms are there. All these Christian symbols are in this text. The push to try to make Doodle something that he's not, something he never should have been. The inability to appreciate Doodle for what he was leads our storyteller to try and make him something else. And in the process, destroying the beautiful thing that is Doodle. In the same way that, of course, the Scarlet Ibis will, in the end of our story, die. Of course, we got a lot of don'ts. Did you notice this on page 386? Lots and lots of don'ts. Can't do this, can't do this, can't do this with Doodle. The storyteller says, drove me nuts. Notice we got other don'ts on page 387. When we play this game of the casket, what is it that Doodle says to him? It's the irony of all ironies. What does he say to his bro? Don't leave me. You'll remember, of course, this is going to be that line at the end of the story, right? Don't leave me, don't leave me. The connectivity between the two. It is the obligation of the older to take care of the younger. We're obviously already working at level 2A, aren't we? It's the obligation of the older to take care of the younger, and yet our storyteller has to admit in our story, he fails at the one thing he's supposed to do. Or does he fail? Because the other side of that is, look at what Doodle accomplishes in his life. If you treat Doodle like a cripple, Doodle will respond like a cripple. That is to say, he never will evolve into the amazing accomplishment of all the things that he did. Notice how this story leads the reader to have to make some very difficult decisions about how you interpret whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing for the brother. Some have said it's the right thing, it's just going to come out of a different kind of place. Maybe that pride that's referenced in the story, right? Of course, this notion of learning is central, so let's go ahead and play that game now. This is, of course, a powerful allegorical text. No question, we were beginning with allegory. But behind this story is actually the great cave allegory of Plato's famous text, Republic. In the cave sit people who are chained up. They can only see shadows on a wall because there's a fire behind them. Somebody from the outside comes in and liberates one of the youngest from being chained up, drags him out into the light of the sun outside of the cave, and kicking and screaming, the young kid doesn't want to go. But when he gets outside, he realizes, oh, the world I lived in the cave wasn't real. It was all shadows that I thought were real on the wall. Notice how this game it gets played here in terms of learning is the process of being drug out of the cave into the light of the sun. What motivates your learning? Notice we got different motivations here. He's able to motivate Doodle to actually try. Yes? And of course, we know what the motivations are for our narrator. He doesn't want to be embarrassed or ashamed, right? The next key line for us, continuing, is of course the program itself, right? We've got the promise of all of the future. Look at page 391. The summer of 1918 was blighted. Well, of course, that's the summer where you're going to have people from their community dying from World War I, right? Notice promise, the third line on page 391 from the top. Promise hung about us, again, interesting simile, like the leaves, and wherever we looked, ferns unfurled, and birds broke into song. We're already setting ourselves up for the end of our story, right? It's a powerful image. After a storm, and we've got this foreshadowing thing happening in this story. After the storm, the father goes out into the middle of the cornfield. It's destroyed, which means his livelihood is destroyed. His economic livelihood is destroyed. And he stands in the middle of the cornfield with his two sons standing by him. And he raises his fist to the heavens and he starts screaming at God. thinking very much in that mythological Promethean kind of way, right? Of, screaming at God, cursing at God. The boys, of course, kind of laugh. There's some foreshadowing going on here, but think about the conflict of character versus nature, right? The father can't believe that this has happened. Of course, a storm is going to play a major, major part in the ways in which this whole thing happens, right? Notice we're on page 391. I purposely walked fast, and although he kept up, Doodle's face turned red, and his eyes became glazed. Once he could go no further, so he collapsed on the ground and began to cry. "Aw, come on, Doodle," I urged him. "You can do it. You want to be different from everyone else when you start school?" Notice Doodle's question. Does it make any difference? In other words, let's put it in our notes, another major theme at 2A. What is so wrong with being different? Brother desperately wants Doodle to fit in, to be just like everybody else. Doodle asks the question, as, of course, saints will. What's so wrong with being different? Or to quote Longfellow's Psalm of Life, "In this world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle, be a hero in the strife." What's so wrong with being different? Right? Does it make any difference? It certainly does, I said. Now come on. And I helped him up. As we slipped through dog days, Doodle began to look feverish. Things are not going well. Then, of course, on to page 392, it was Saturday noon, just a few days before school was to start. I should have already admitted defeat, but my pride wouldn't let me. The excitement of our program had now been gone for weeks, but still we kept on with a tired doggedness. It was too late to turn back, for we had both wandered too far into a net of expectations and had left no crumbs behind. Too late. Their pride cannot admit, especially his pride, cannot admit, this is a dumb project and I'm killing my little brother by forcing him to do it. The expectations are rooted in a pride. Then, calm. Then, looks like a storm's coming. Then, the bleeding ibis, right? Of course, notice the scarlet ibis is next to the bleeding tree, right? It's a great big red bird. Notice it's Doodle who finds it. Notice it's Doodle who keeps asking, what is it? Of course, this is classic James Hurst here in this story. I'll tell you what it is, he will say. It's a symbol. Let's write it down. Now we're ready to come to our 2B observation. In what ways is the scarlet ibis a symbol of Doodle? Hurst himself has said that he didn't want it to just simply be a physical resemblance. The scarlet ibis is fragile, Doodle is fragile. No. For Hurst, there's way more profound symbolism going on here, isn't there? The scarlet ibis falls out of the tree with a thud. It's beautiful even in its death because it looks like flowers that are together, right? The beauty of this whole thing, right? And then a floating feather dropping as well. The bird's fall is described for us on 393, right? It straightens out the bird's still. Even death did not mar the bird's grace, for it lay on the earth. Look at this simile, like a broken vase of red flowers. And we stood around it, awed by its exotic beauty. Again, going back to my observation, it's not the what is it part, it's the how does it work part. Oh, there's a simile there, a comparison using like or as. Yeah, you're right, but go back and look at the simile one more time. Even death did not mar its grace, the bird. For it lay, the bird, on the earth, here's the simile, like a broken vase of red flowers. Jot down. What's significant about that simile? Okay, we know it's a simile. How does it work, knowing the way that this story ends? Well, you might say you take this beautiful vase, right? And you throw it onto the ground and it shatters. Not only does it lose its functionality, it can no longer be a vase, but it loses its beauty as well. But notice the other part of this. We are awed, like, whoa, it's so amazing, by its exotic beauty. Can we say this out loud? Our narrator is recognizing he could not respect what Doodle was when Doodle was alive. It's only when Doodle is broken when there's blood coming out of his mouth. That it's finally at that point that he recognizes the beauty of his own brother. Think about it at 3B. The people in your life who you yet have fully respected them for their differences. That is what makes them beautiful and significant. And yet, we have a tendency to try to make people who are different from us into what we are. We have a tendency to feel suspicious about people who are different from us. Different skin color, different political views, different kinds of cultural understandings, right? And we have a tendency to say, I will only be your friend if you become more increasingly like me. And in the process, we destroy the very vase that is so beautiful. Powerful simile, right? Of course, point out as well, this is a foreign bird. He doesn't fit in. He doesn't belong here in the same way that maybe Doodle, like most saints, don't actually belong, right? Doodle's not hungry. Of course, Doodle is the one that wants to bury the bird, right? He sings, "Shall we gather at the river," which is, of course, a Christian hymn, right? As he carries the bird around. Notice it kind of makes him laugh. But when he arrives, he's pale. And he lingers just inside the screen at the bottom of 393, right? Did you get the Scarlet Ibis buried? He doesn't answer. Go wash your hands. I'm not hungry. And then, notice 394. Top of the page, it's always Aunt Nicey. She's kind of like the Sibyl. She's kind of like Tiresias, the prophet, who's always giving the important word. Notice at the top of 394, dead birds is bad luck, said Aunt Nicey, pointing her head from the kitchen door. Especially red dead birds. As soon as I had finished eating, Doodle and I hurried off to Horsehead Landing. Look at the lines. Time was short. And Doodle still had a long way to go if he was going to keep up with the other boys. Time is short. This is, of course, a story about time. Think about it from 2B. It's a story about time in terms of how you tell a story. You've got the past, an event that happened long ago, and you have an adult narrator who's remembering the past, which begs a very interesting question. Why write this story? I would write that down. Why write this story? Why do storytellers ever write stories? I mean, we're at now the end of Unit 2. Short stories. And it begs a question. Why write a story? Why tell a story? We're trying to understand something, aren't we? In the past, something happened. We can't go back. He can't save Doodle, right? He can't undo what he's done. And yet he wants to tell the story. He wants to figure out what its meaning was. Of course, the black clouds gather on page 394. Now that we know how this story ends, we can see it all beginning to be tied together. Doodle, we're told, is both tired and he's frightened, right? Notice, he knows. He smiles, ashamed. He knows he's failed, we're told, right? He's looking for a sign of mercy. Key line for us on page 394. And instead, I began to run. The rain is coming. The thunder is coming. The lightning jacks the tree. All of these are, of course, foreshadowing of what's about to happen, right? And then he screams it. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. We're back, of course, to the coffin scene, the casket scene in the loft of the barn, right? The knowledge that Doodle, look at the last paragraph of 394. The knowledge that Doodle's and my plans had come to naught was bitter. And that streak of cruelty, of course, that streak of cruelty goes back to the loft in the barn, right? When he's going to make him touch his own casket. That streak of cruelty within me awakened. At 3B, it's an interesting question. Let's ask it. Why do humans have that streak of cruelty? And when was the last time you felt that streak of cruelty? You mustn't say that you've never felt it, our storyteller will suggest. We all seem to have it, with the exception of Doodle. Which is kind of what makes him a special bird. It makes him a special kind of person. It makes him a saint, right? And for those of you who know anything about Christian theology and the history of Christian theology, this is, of course, the Francis of Assisi moment. That most amazing of saints who spent all of his time with the animals, especially, of course, the birds, right? And he leaves him. The drops are stinging his face, and he runs away. But then on page 395, he calls it a flood of childish spite, eviscerates, goes away. But notice the next line. Hey, stay with me, stay with me. Don't grow tired of what we're doing. I am showing you how to read close. Look on page 395. For those of you who say, It's just a stupid story, dude. I mean, really, why do we gotta see it as anything more than that? Dude, just read the story with me at $3.95 and appreciate for a moment the genius of what you're actually reading. Look at it. I'm with you. I'm looking at the last lines on $3.95, starting at the very top of the page. I hadn't run too far before I became tired, and the flood of childish spite eviscerated as well. I stopped and waited for Doodle. The sound of rain was everywhere, but the wind had died, and it fell straight down in parallel paths. Look at the simile. The ropes, the rain, like ropes hanging from the sky. The rain is falling. Now, of course, we're already getting a sense something bad's about to happen here. What happens with ropes? Of course, this whole notion of hanging is coming, right? Keep reading. As I waited, I peered through the downpour the same way that they watched Doodle bury that bird peering through the screen door. Right? But no one came. Finally, I went back and found him, huddled beneath a red nightshade bush beside the road. Of course, the colors we've already pointed out. He was sitting on the ground, his face buried in his arms, which were resting on his drawn-up knees. "Let's go, Doodle," I said. And it begs the question, what kind of voice is used with "let's go, Doodle"? Is it an exasperated voice? Is it a fatigued voice? "Let's go, Doodle." He didn't answer. The silence of the story, by the way. If we were reading it at another level, we'd go back and pay attention to all the silence. You'll remember what Mozart said about music. The music is not in the notes. It's in the silence between the notes. And we would say the same is true of great fiction. Here we are. Notice he doesn't answer. Now it's silent. Note the storm is passing. Right? The storm is passing. And now it's kind of silent, as he is silent. I placed my hand on his forehead, lifted his head up. The word limply, of course, comes to mind already. He fell backwards onto the earth, exactly, of course, the way the Scarlet Ibis fell. He had been bleeding from the mouth, and his neck and the front of his shirt were stained a brilliant red. Brilliant red? Everything's intentional with this one. Brilliant red? What do you mean brilliant red? Well, it means bright. Scarlet. Scarlet Ibis. Brilliant red. And yet we have another meaning for the word brilliant. It's the opposite of stupid. A brilliant red. "Doodle, Doodle," I cried, shaking him, but there was no answer. But the ropey rain, we're back to the ropes. He lay very awkwardly. Now all of a sudden he doesn't look right. Take a look. He laid awkwardly, head thrown far back, making his vermilion neck, we're back to the neck of the Scarlet Ibis, that beautiful neck, appear unusually long and slim. His little legs bent sharply at the knees had never before seemed so fragile, so thin. It's only in his death, Doodle's death, that the narrator can have any sense of who Doodle actually was. It's finally then he realizes how fragile he is. When it's what? Too late. When it's all over. In other words, we often understand how we've destroyed what is fragile, but it's only after we've destroyed it. It's not before. And sometimes we destroy something fragile thinking we're doing something good, something, we might say even something right. Of course, he weeps. The tear-blurred vision in red before me looked very familiar. Again, "Doodle," I screamed above the pounding storm. Throw my body to the earth above his. For a long, long time, it seemed forever. I lay there crying, sheltering my fallen, and then, of course, to make sure that we get it, Scarlet Ibis, from the heresy of rain. I think it's significant that the word saint is used earlier in the story and the word heresy is used at the end of the story. In other words, the inability to recognize or to believe what is right in front of him. To see Doodle as a gift. He didn't see Doodle as a gift. He first saw him as a curse. I'm going to smother him to death. And then he saw him as a project. I'm going to save him. I'm going to make sure that he fits in. And he misses the one thing about Doodle. Totally misses the one thing about Doodle that matters. All right, let's quickly now jump to 2 and level 3. At 2A, we've mentioned so many themes. Jot down all the ones that we've talked about. What is the most powerful one for you? Is it the idea that we should appreciate the people who are uniquely different in our lives? Think about the one student in this building who everybody sees as so different, so worthy of contempt, jeering, being made fun of, and the next time just see them as Doodle. See that individual as Doodle. Somebody uniquely important. What is it that Ralph Waldo Emerson says in a text called Self-Reliance? To be great is to be misunderstood. He who would be a man must be a nonconformist. It's important that we have different people in the world. It's frightening when we start to try to make everyone the same. We will destroy the beautiful vase, we might say, right? Okay, at 2b, we've already mentioned it, the primary symbols. Obviously the ibis is a symbol. But come up with another symbol. What is for you the powerful symbol of this text that we have not yet mentioned? There's all kinds of symbols. The symbol of flowers, the symbol of rain falling, storms, all kinds. What's the primary conflict? I told you we were going to ask this question. What is for you the primary conflict? See, watch a genius text. Watch this. Can you jot down a conflict of character versus self? Some have argued it's the whole story, right? Coming to terms with that last word forever in the second to the last line. That is to say, how do you live with something that you know you're responsible for? Long, long ago, the writing of the story is clearly cathartic for our narrator, isn't it? How about character versus another character? Well, obviously Doodle and his bro go at it, don't they? Especially the contest of, come on, I know you can do this. The pushing him, right? How about character versus nature? We already mentioned the father screaming up to the heavens, Job-like, we think of in that famous theophany passage of the book of Job from the Bible, where you have the exchange between God and Job. That notion of character versus nature. How about character versus an idea or society? What is it that leads the narrator to do this? He's ashamed. Ashamed of what? I'm not showing up at school with my bro looking the way he looks, right? Fascinating. Let's jump to 3a. What is for you the text that comes to mind that most can relate to this text? Again, we're going to see in a text that follows the Bradbury text the ways in which they compare. What is for you the text, though, about how something beautiful is destroyed, unintentionally destroyed? It's not technically that the narrator really wanted to kill his brother Doodle, right? It's that he couldn't appreciate. Can you jot down a text for you that teaches that? Maybe it's a song that teaches you the power of appreciating the beautiful, simple things in life. And why can't those things be enough?